The moment I walked through the front door, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't anything dramatic. No screaming, no broken glass. Just the sound of my sister-in-law laughing at something my husband said. The smell of a real dinner. Pot roast, maybe. Something that took hours. And the way the dining room light spilled warm and golden into the hallway while I stood there in my scrubs, with my bag still on my shoulder, still half frozen from the parking lot. I'd been on shift since 6 in the morning. 12 hours on a cardiac floor does something to your body that sleep never fully fixes. Your feet stop feeling like they belong to you somewhere around hour 9. By hour 12, you're just moving from one task to the next on pure habit, running on the muscle memory of a job you've done so many times that your hands know what to do even when your brain has quietly checked out. I was 31 years old and I was exhausted in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't done it. What I expected to come home to, my daughter. Layla, she would have been 6 that October. Curly dark hair. This way she had of running at me from across the room like I'd been gone for years instead of hours. I expected to find her at the kitchen table doing the little homework packets her teacher sent home on Tuesdays. I expected her to ask me what I brought her, even though I never brought her anything on regular days, and I expected to say nothing, baby, and watch her pretend to be outraged. What I found instead was my sister-in-law's 2 boys, 8 and 10, loud and full of energy the way boys that age always are, sitting at my kitchen table eating the dinner I had not made, using the plates I'd picked out, with my husband pouring them more juice and saying something that made them both dissolve into laughter. My sister-in-law was leaning back in her chair with a glass of wine, my wine, the bottle I'd been saving because it had been a gift from a coworker when I passed my certification exam 2 years ago. She looked comfortable. She looked like she lived there. "Oh, you're home," my husband said when he saw me. Not, "Hey, how is your shift?" Or "You look tired, sit down." Just, "Oh, you're home," the way you'd acknowledge someone who had walked into the wrong meeting. I asked where Layla was. He looked at me with this expression I can only describe as briefly annoyed, like I'd asked a question that interrupted the mood, and said she was in her room. My daughter's room is at the end of the hall. I walked there, still in my coat, and I opened the door and she was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed holding her stuffed rabbit. She'd named it Clover. She'd had it since she was 2, and she was not crying that she had been. You can always tell. The pink around the eyes, the way she was breathing slow and deliberate, like she was working very hard at being okay. I sat down on the floor next to her and didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "They said I couldn't watch TV in the living room." I asked who said that. Aunt Sasha's boys. And Dad said to just let them have it. I pulled her into my lap even though she's almost too big for that now. And she let me. And I sat there in her room with the carpet slightly sticky from something that probably needed to be cleaned, and I thought, something needs to change. But I want to back up, because this didn't start that night. My husband's sister, Sasha, had come to stay with us 6 weeks earlier. Her marriage had ended badly. I actually felt for her in the beginning. I know how it feels to have the ground disappear under you, and I wasn't going to be the person who said no to family when family needed somewhere to land. She had 2 kids and nowhere to go, and my husband asked me, and I said yes. The agreement was 2 months, maybe 3. She would look for work, look for an apartment, get back on her feet. We had a guest room. We had the space. It felt like the right thing to do. What I hadn't understood was how quickly the weight of it would shift. The first few weeks weren't bad. She cooked sometimes, watched the kids together in the afternoons, and my husband seemed happier having her around. He and Sasha had always been close, closer than I'd ever had with my own siblings, and I told myself that was fine. That was good, actually. I was glad he had that. But somewhere around week 3, things started tilting. I started noticing that Layla was always the one who gave something up. If there were 4 juice boxes and 4 kids, somehow Layla ended up without one. If there was one good spot on the couch, the boys had it. My husband said I was being oversensitive. He said kids work things out. He said I hovered too much. I'm a nurse. I notice things. It's not hovering, it's paying attention. There's a difference. Then came the bedroom. Sasha told my husband that the boys were cramped in the guest room. They needed space to sleep properly, she said. They were growing. My husband agreed without talking to me that Layla would move her things into our room temporarily so the boys could have her bedroom. I found out when I came home from a night shift and Layla's dresser was in our hallway. I stood in that hallway for probably 2 full minutes without speaking. When I finally talked to my husband about it, he said it was just temporary. He said Layla didn't mind. I asked him if he'd actually asked Layla if she minded, or if he'd told Layla she didn't mind. He said I was making something out of nothing. That night was the first time I called my mother. I didn't tell her everything, I just said I was struggling. She asked me the question she always asks, the one that used to frustrate me when I was younger, but has started to feel more like a gift. What are you actually afraid of? I didn't have an answer yet, but I started paying attention differently after that. I started writing things down, not in an accusatory way, not building a case, just keeping track, dates, incidents, things that were said. My mother always said that memory is selective and emotions distort things, and if you write something down the day it happens, you can trust it later. I'd kept a journal off and on my whole life. I went back to it. What I wrote down over the next 3 weeks surprised me when I read it back. Layla had eaten dinner alone in her room 6 times, not because she was in trouble, because the table was full, or it was easier, or she'd already had a snack. My husband had taken Sasha's boys to a baseball game on a Saturday that he had originally told Layla was going to be their day. He bought them team jerseys. He had not invited Layla. When I asked him about it, he said it was a boys' trip and Layla wouldn't have had fun anyway. She was 6. She would have had fun. She loves baseball. He knows that. I also noticed the money starting to feel wrong. We had a joint checking account for household expenses. Groceries, utilities, kids' activities, that kind of thing. I deposited a set amount from each paycheck and so did my husband. In theory, it was balanced. In practice, I had started noticing the balance was lower than it should be, faster than it should be. I'm not good at math in the abstract, but I'm very good at patterns. When something is off, I feel it before I can name it. I pulled up the statements one evening while my husband was watching TV with Sasha. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I went through 3 months of transactions. There was a purchase at a children's clothing store that I had not made and that had not been discussed. $312, then another one, $180 at a toy store. A recurring charge at a subscription service I didn't recognize. A restaurant I'd never been to, twice, on days I had been working. None of it was mine. None of it was for Layla. I did the math. Over approximately 10 weeks, roughly $2,200 had been spent from our joint account on things that had nothing to do with me or my daughter. I want to be precise here because I think precision matters. It was not the amount that broke something in me, it was what it meant. It meant that while I was working 12-hour shifts on a cardiac floor, exhausted and doing it partly so that my daughter would have what she needed, that money, my hours, my body wearing down at 31, was buying Christmas presents for someone else's kids. I didn't say anything that night. I made a copy of the statements, printed them at the pharmacy down the street the next morning, and I put them in a folder in my locker at work. Then I called a family law attorney. Her name was Josephine. A friend from nursing school had used her 2 years ago during her divorce and had said she was honest, no nonsense, didn't drag things out. I liked her immediately on the phone. She asked me what was happening and she listened without interrupting, and at the end she said, "Don't move money. Don't make accusations yet. Keep documenting, and don't have any significant conversations with your husband about this until we've talked in person. I followed those instructions exactly. It wasn't easy. There were moments over the next 2 weeks where I wanted to sit my husband down and just ask him what happened to us. When did I stop mattering to you? But I didn't. I went to work. I came home. I made sure Layla knew she was loved. I wrote things down. The in-person meeting with Josephine was on a Thursday morning. She went through everything I'd brought, the printed statements, the journal entries, notes I'd taken. She was quiet while she read. When she was done, she looked up and said, "This is a pattern, not an incident. I want you to understand the difference because it matters for what comes next." She walked me through my options. I asked about the joint account and whether I could transfer my portion somewhere separate, and she explained what I could and couldn't do legally. She told me to open an individual account at a different bank that week, not to hide money, but to protect the money I was actively earning while we figured out next steps. She told me what documentation I would need for a divorce proceeding if that's where this went. I drove home that day and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, more like clarity. Like the noise that had been building for months had finally been given a shape. I opened the individual account that Friday. I did not tell my husband. Over the next week and a half, I quietly moved through the house cataloging what was mine. Not things I wanted to fight over. I'm not built that way. But things that were specifically mine that had no shared history. Things I had brought into the marriage or bought with my own money before things got complicated. My grandmother's ring. A necklace my mother had given me for my nursing school graduation. Layla's birth documents, her vaccination records, her social security card. My own documents. I put all of it in a bag in my locker at work. I arranged for us to stay with my mother temporarily. She lives 40 minutes away in a house that has a spare bedroom and a backyard and a dog named Biscuit that Layla is obsessed with. I told my mother the full picture during one long phone call on my lunch break. She cried a little and then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And that's why she's my mother. I told my husband I needed to talk to him on a Sunday evening. Sasha had taken her boys to her own mother's place for the weekend. For once, some luck. So it was just us. Layla was at my mother's already, staying over for fun, which wasn't a lie exactly. I sat at the kitchen table. I had the folder of bank statements in front of me. I told him what I'd found. I told him clearly and without a lot of emotion. Not because I didn't have emotions, but because I had made a decision about how I wanted to conduct myself in this conversation. I told him what the statements showed. I told him what the statements showed. I told him what I had spent the past 2 months watching happen with our daughter. I told him I had spoken with an attorney. He went through several phases in about 10 minutes. First, he said I was misreading the statements. Then he said the purchases were for things the household needed. Then he got angry and said I had no right to go behind his back to a lawyer. Then he got quiet. In the quiet, I told him I was leaving and taking Layla with me. He said I couldn't do that. I told him I had already spoken with my attorney about what I was and wasn't legally able to do, and I'd be in touch through her office. I picked up my folder and my keys and I left. I want to tell you that driving away was this enormous emotional moment. That I cried or felt free or felt terrified. The truth is I felt mostly just tired. And then, about 4 miles down the road with the radio off and the heater running and my hands steady on the wheel, I started crying, not dramatically, just quietly for about 3 minutes, and then I was done. I pulled into my mother's driveway and Layla ran out to the car because she'd been watching from the window. She asked why I was here so late. I told her we were going to stay at Grandma's for a little while, like a sleepover that lasted a bit longer. She asked if she could sleep in Grandma's big bed. I said yes. She ran back inside. My mother was standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She just stepped aside to let me in and put her hand on my back for a second as I passed, and that was enough. The divorce process was not fast and it was not clean. My husband initially refused mediation. Josephine had told me to expect that. She'd also told me to let her handle the conversations. And I did, even when it was hard. Even when he sent me long text messages late at night that I was not supposed to respond to. I showed them to Josephine. She said, "Perfect. Keep not responding." The bank statements became central to everything. Josephine subpoenaed additional records. There was more than I'd found. Over 8 months, more than $4,000 had come out of our joint accounts in ways that were connected to Sasha's household. Her boys, school supplies, a car repair, spending at stores in her neighborhood. My husband had been managing this quietly, and I think he had genuinely convinced himself it wasn't significant. It was significant. My attorney filed for divorce citing financial misconduct. We also filed for full residential custody of Layla, citing documented pattern of differential treatment. I had the journal. I had photographs I'd taken of her bedroom after her dresser was moved into the hallway. I had a text message from my husband sent 4 months earlier where he told me to stop making everything about Layla when I'd raised concerns about her being excluded from dinner. People ask me if I feel angry at Sasha. I've thought about this a lot. The honest answer is, I think she took what was offered. I don't think she set out to displace my daughter. I think she was in a desperate situation and she leaned on her brother, and her brother let her lean in ways that cost his own child something. The failure wasn't hers. The failure was his. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I left. I received primary residential custody of Layla. My husband has parenting time, which Layla handles better than I expected. She loves her father, and I think that's the right thing. I want her to have that. The financial settlement included reimbursement for a portion of the joint account spending, which Josephine handled. We stayed at my mother's for 4 months. Then I found a 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from the hospital. First floor, small backyard. Layla can see the neighbor's cat through the fence, which she considers a major selling point. I painted her room the exact shade of yellow she picked herself from the hardware store's swatchbook. She stood there for 45 minutes choosing. I've been back at work the whole time. I won't pretend that was easy. But I'm good at my job, and there's something clarifying about being good at something, about knowing that the thing you're doing matters regardless of what your personal life looks like that day. Layla asked me once, about 3 months after we moved into the apartment, if I was sad. I thought about it for a second. I told her sometimes, yeah, but not in a bad way. More like when something ends and you understand it had to. She said, like when a song is over. I said exactly like that. She seemed satisfied with that answer. She went back to her drawing. She was drawing Clover the rabbit, giving him a tiny little house with a yellow door. I have a folder on my phone now, just photos. Layla at her first soccer practice. Layla making pancakes on a Saturday with flour on her nose. Layla asleep in the car on the way home from my mother's, mouth open, completely out. Just ordinary things. But I look at them sometimes when I've had a hard shift, standing in the parking garage before I drive home, and I think, this is the thing you were protecting. This was always the thing. You don't always know in the middle of a hard season what you're actually building. You just keep going. You take notes. You find people who are honest with you. You listen to your attorney. And eventually, you get to a Sunday morning where there's no drama and no wait, and your daughter is eating cereal in yellow pajamas, and the cat next door is sitting on the fence, and the light in the kitchen is actually pretty nice. That's the whole story. I know it doesn't end with anything dramatic, but I don't think the good endings usually do. I think about the night I sat on Layla's bedroom floor a lot. Not because it was the worst night, it wasn't actually, but it was the first night I stopped talking myself out of what I already knew. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The hardest part isn't the leaving. It's the months before the leaving when you're quietly negotiating with yourself, finding reasons why what you're seeing isn't as bad as it looks, telling yourself you're being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. I did that for weeks. And every time I did, something small got worse. Another dinner alone for Layla. Another weekend plan broken. Another withdrawal I hadn't approved. What I've come to understand, not from a book, just from living through it, is that most situations don't turn bad all at once. They turn bad slowly, in increments small enough that your brain keeps reclassifying them as normal. The only way I caught it was by writing it down. By trusting the record more than I trusted my own tendency to forgive too quickly. That's not cynicism. That's just being honest about how the mind protects itself from uncomfortable conclusions. I'm not proud of everything I did during that period. There were moments I wasn't as present for Layla as I should have been because I was carrying so much internally. There were moments I was cold to my husband in ways that weren't productive. But I'm proud that when I finally saw the full picture clearly, I didn't act from anger. I acted from a plan. I called Josephine. I kept documentation. I protected what needed protecting without burning everything down in a single night. That gap between feeling something and acting on it wisely took everything I had. But it mattered. It mattered in the courtroom. It mattered in the settlement. It mattered to Layla. Sasha wasn't a villain. I genuinely believe that. She was someone in a hard place who leaned on the people who let her. What I've had to make peace with is that my husband made choices, repeated deliberate choices, to take from his daughter in order to give to his sister's children. And the effect of those choices on a 6-year-old who didn't understand why she was being pushed to the edges of her own home, that was real. The consequences were real. Not because the universe was punishing anyone, but because actions accumulate. They compound. The $200 here and the skipped dinner there and the bedroom given away, all of it added up to something that couldn't be undone by an apology. What I want Layla to grow up knowing, and what I try to live in front of her every day, is that integrity isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself first. About what you're seeing, about what you deserve, about what your child deserves. That kind of clarity requires something most people don't talk about. The willingness to face a hard truth even when the easier option is to look away. That takes courage that isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet kind. The kind that shows up at 6 a.m. when you're tired and still goes to work. The kind that writes things down when it would be easier to forget. Her room is yellow now. She picked it. She stood in the hardware store for 45 minutes choosing between 4 shades that all looked identical to me, but she knew exactly which one was right. That's enough. That's the whole point.